Hi, Jesse. I'm Miriam Spritzer. I just got back yesterday from a family trip, and it was so perfect to watch your film a little while ago, and then I made my parents watch it as well because it's a
Oh,
very similar story to your character stories in many ways. So
yeah.
I was wondering what type of traveler are you? Are you more like David or more like Benji?
So basically, I never left the country until I met my wife, and I met her when I was 18. And when we first started dating, she said, "Okay, for Christmas this year, I'm going down to Venezuela." My wife comes from very like left-wing activists, so it was at the time when Venezuela. And forgive me because you're Brazilian,
Yeah.
but at this very brief period in time, it seemed like Hugo Chavez perhaps was like. And so, and forgive me, obviously things changed so dramatically in your neighbors. And I went to the border of Brazil on that trip. But basically, she said she was going down there to take a look at Venezuela and the changes that were happening. And I didn't know where Venezuela was or what continent it was on. I was a sheltered kid from New Jersey, and she said, "You could either come with me or I go alone." And I'm like, I told my parents, and they didn't know what was going on. But anyway, I went down to Venezuela with her when I was 18, and it was completely life changing to the point where like I had never seen lifestyles quite different to me. It was so life-changing, and I was panicked the entire time I was there, and my wife was frolicking in the sand and meeting local people and spending time with this indigenous communities, and I was just panicked that I was going to get the flu or some infection the entire time. And then of course nothing bad happened to me. And so the interesting thing is, for me as a traveler, we've done this now a lot. We backpacked through the world, my wife and I'm always in a state of panic the entire time, and she's always enjoying herself. And yet I always go back and write about it. So I've written about, like, in fact, the Venezuela trip, a lot of that trip is in this movie because we went with 8 people, and the
Yeah.
tour group was quite similar to this tour group in A Real Pain. And so I'm a nervous traveler, and I don't enjoy it while I'm there, and I can't live in the moment ever in my life. And yet it's so meaningful to me, and I relive it and write about it.
Now, one of the things that I love about the film is there are so many layers to it. You have the relationship between the two cousins. You also have, sort of a presence about Judaism there and the Holocaust, which are all very complicated to address. So I wanted to ask you, what did you want to make sure you got right when telling this story? Because I know you shot it before this moment that we're leaving now, that
For sure.
anti-Semitism is crazy, but such a thoughtful movie and the tone you
Mm,
use is so great when telling
thank
all
you.
these different aspects. So I was wondering about your thought process behind it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the thing I wanted to get right more than anything was just this central relationship in the movie, that these guys felt real.
Yeah.
And the history behind it, I know academically because I'm just curious about the history. Perhaps you are too. And so I just wanted to make sure that the relationship seemed authentic. I thought if I can create two characters that were so realistic and lived in, then I could put them in the backdrop of history, and the history will feel real too, because they'd be reacting to the history in realistic ways. And sometimes that means, not crying when you think you might be crying. Some of the characters go to the concentration camp and end up just feeling numb, which is the thing I felt when I first went there.
Mm.
Just had this feeling of like, and yet Kieran's character is breaking down in tears. That felt real to me too, because I've also seen that when I visited some of these places. You see people who are breaking down in public. And I just wanted to make sure that, and then the scene after that is the characters literally sneak into a building and break into a door so they can go smoke weed on a roof, and they're looking down and seeing the camps below, but they're stoned. And so I just wanted to create imagery and scenarios like that where it felt like these are modern people trying to deal with the modern world, and yet they're coming into contact with real traumatic history and absorbing it like modern people would. So that's what I tried to get right. In terms of the history, I know the history well, and I was not trying to overwhelm the viewers with any kind of like, history lesson, because we all know there's been so many Holocaust movies that have been like history lessons, and they just don't play to an audience because they don't feel like lived in.
I always say that the magic of cinema is not really what we see as like something magical on the screen, but really something magical that happens behind the screen, especially when you have an independent production that so many wrong things can happen, or
Yeah.
a scene you imagine was not the way it came out. I wanted to ask you, what was the big magic of cinema for you in this project?
Whew, that's a great question. There were two things I would point to. One is how welcomed I felt by Polish people. This is a country that, I have relatives who say, "Why would you go to Poland? They're anti-Semitic." And my experience was just the exact opposite. I was welcomed with open arms by everybody, including the people who ran the concentration camp, who spend their days memorializing my family's history, where they have to work in the most bleak place on the planet every day and eat lunch and in the most bleak place on the planet so that they can memorialize my family's history. And the other thing that was really a kind of wonderful surprise was seeing how great Kieran was. It was a character that I was originally going to play myself, and I had all these thoughts about how the character would behave. And Kieran didn't exactly perform it in the way that I had pictured, but it was so great and realistic and fun and light and sad and all these great things that it was just, I was kind of endlessly surprised by him and kind of marveling at him. And even when he wasn't doing it the way I had planned, I just kind of sat back and thought, well, this is just as good or maybe better. And so that was the other magical thing that I couldn't have foreseen.
Well, it turned out to be great on
Thanks.
every sort. What a fun movie to watch and also very meaningful. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for making this film and for taking the time for this chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much.